What's good? It's Woog. We have an undefeated son of a legend taking on a former champion who remains the only guy to beat now undisputed 154-pound champion Jermell Charlo. Yes, I am talking about Tszyu, 21 wins and 0 losses, taking on Tony Harrison, 29 wins, 3 losses, and 1 draw. This fight is taking place in Sydney, Australia. Australia, the home country of Tszyu, and Tszyu is billed as the A-side fighter in this match, even though it's Tony Harrison, who's the former champ. And Tszyu was actually supposed to be next in line to take on undisputed 154-pound champion Jermell Charlo, but Jermell Charlo injured his hand, had to withdraw from the fight, and now we have Tszyu versus Tony Harrison. And you know, I'm often skeptical with sons of fighters in terms of, you know, their level of grit, their level of commitment. I mean, sometimes it does turn out that they are the real deal. Other times it doesn't. And, you know, Tszyu is the son of Tszyu, longtime unified champion at 140, and he's beaten the likes of old Julio Cesar Chavez, but the old version. He's knocked out Sharmba Mitchell twice. He knocked out a prime Zab Judah, gave Zab Judah his first loss with a iconic knockout towards the end of the second round, where Zab Judah got up way too quick. His legs started twitching and it became kind of viral before viral. Tszyu stopped Ben Taki, Miguel Angel Gonzalez, Rafael Ruelas. Yeah, Tszyu had it going on at 140 until he finally got beaten. Well, I mean, he had a loss earlier in his career, but after that long run, he held those titles and accumulated more titles on the way until he finally got beaten by Ricky Hatton, and then Tszyu retired. But yeah, Tszyu, son of a legend. He's been pretty much hyped a little bit more than his accomplishments would merit. I mean, he does have some good, impressive wins. I mean, I had seen him fight a few times earlier in his career, but I really started taking note when I saw him stop Jeff Horn. Now, Jeff Horn was at his best at 147. Jeff Horn at 154 fought a great fight against Michael Zarafa, but Jeff Horn, you know, he's kind of been over the hill for a while, and he was already post-prime at the time that Tszyu stopped Horn, but it was a big deal, especially regionally. So every fight after that, I would set the, you know, the alarm super early, wake up. I'm on the west coast of California. All of Tszyu's fights take place, you know, except for his very last fight. Most of his fights take place in Australia or sometimes New Zealand. But from stopping Dennis Hogan to Steve Spark, I looked at, you know, Tszyu as being an interesting project that, you know, I mean, I was interested in his career development, not too dissimilarly from the interest that I had towards Conor Benn, you know, before Conor Benn started picking up like the knockout against Algieri and, you know, the more high profile fights, like his dominance over Adrian Granados. So Tszyu was looking pretty interesting, but I thought that, you know, there was a ceiling. It was clear that he hit really hard. I didn't love his footwork, still don't love his footwork. I'm not crazy about his head movement. It's actually interesting. You see him start walking fighters into the ropes. Like after he got dropped in the first round by Terrell Goucher, which was his very last fight and his first fight in the United States, he got dropped by Terrell Goucher. But round after round, he started, you know, walking Goucher down. He didn't stop Goucher, but Goucher, you knew that in order for Goucher to have a chance at winning, he had to stay off the ropes. But round after round, even though Tszyu doesn't have the most aggressive cutting the ring off type footwork, doesn't have the fastest feet either. However, he seems to keep on pinning Goucher up against the ropes and letting, you know, his left hand to the body go, ripping right-handed uppercuts. Tszyu really does like those right-handed uppercuts, but he's a hard puncher, but I still can't figure out how he's having so much success trapping some people who seem equally skilled as him against the ropes. So it's kind of like a patient pressure. Like he's not Jorge Arce in terms of going head over heels after you. He's patiently walking you down. He's throwing some feints, and yes, he will throw occasional nice counters. Like, don't sleep on his counter right hand. He doesn't throw it too often, but when he does so, it's pretty well timed. And then he's got a nice counter left hook. So again, right uppercut, digging, left-handed power punch to the body. He loves that punch, especially when he starts getting you closer and closer to the ropes. But he's got a nice arsenal of punches. But again, I can't quite put my finger on whether it's a style of feinting. It's not like he's doing a ton of level changing and a whole bunch of trickery to get you to, without even really knowing, backing up closer to the ropes. Or maybe that is what he's doing and I'm just not really understanding the technique. And I mean the specific technique that Tszyu has been using to success. But now he's going to be in there against Tony Harrison. And, you know, if you look at Tszyu's opponents, they've been a lot of shorter fighters. Terrell Gausha is about what, 5'9", 5'10"? Jeff Horn, 5'9", Dennis Hogan, 5'8". I mean, Tszyu himself is about 5'8", although he's listed at 5'9". I've seen him listed at both 5'8" and 5'9". Tony Harrison is 6'1". So remember, Tony Harrison had those back-to-back fights against Jermell Charlo. And remember, Tony Harrison was kind of standing his ground. It's not like he's a negative fighter, as they say, where he is basically always taking a step back. He will kind of stand his ground in several moments. He'll hit you with a nicely timed jab. He's got a really nice right hand. It's not the hardest right hand, but it's always a pretty fast, well-timed right hand. And because I think it's because he takes a little something off the fastball, so to speak, that he's able to throw it with more regularity and land it accurately. So Tony Harrison, 2-fisted attack. He's got a nice quick left hook, nice check left hook, you know, as he's backing up. But he could also, again, kind of walk you into certain punches. So he's got a ton of craft. I mean, he was training in the Kronk gym, so he's been schooled by some of the best. Yes, he has lost a couple of fights when he steps up against the upper echelon, and that would be against Jarrett Hurd when Jarrett Hurd was an absolute wrecking ball at 154. I mean, go rewatch Jarrett Hurd versus Erislandy Lara. Fantastic fight. But Jarrett Hurd was just taking people out when he was, you know, having his run in his prime. And then Tony Harrison obviously lost a rematch against Jermell Charlo. We're going to come back to that one. But Tony Harrison lost a couple years earlier than that in 2015 against Willie Nelson. He got stopped in the 9th round of a 10-round fight. And I feel like it's certain performances like that that have the betting odds what they are. I mean, Tszyu is going off at a greater than 2.5 to 1 favorite, making Tony Harrison a plus 210. So he's a greater than 2 to 1 underdog. I saw those lines and I thought that was insane. I'm like, wait a second, which one of these guys is the former champion? Which one of these two guys beat Jermell Charlo? Yes, it was a disputed and very close fight, but he beat Jermell Charlo, and in the rematch against Charlo, he was at least even in the fight. I mean, he was winning through major stretches of that fight. Like if you look at, you know, the scorecard through, I believe, like 6 rounds, 7 rounds, I'm talking unofficial scorecard, Tony Harrison was winning those rounds, several of them, in the rematch against Jermell Charlo. But then it seemed like he lost focus. He was kind of hot dogging a little bit, showboating a little bit. He basically lost sight of his defensive construct and got a little too comfortable in there, got caught by somebody who you just cannot afford to get caught by, Jermell Charlo. I mean, I've seen Jermell Charlo come from behind, you know, against, what was it, John Jackson Jr., I believe? Or it might just be John Jackson, but you know, I've seen multiple fights where Jermell Charlo is losing rounds and then he comes back to win the fight, just catching the guy at the right time. And yeah, Tony Harrison, I remember looking at the, you know, the post-fight interview, not in the ring, but back in Tony Harrison's locker room. He was devastated because he knew that he had this, not so much in the bag, obviously, but he was on his path to potentially winning both fights against Jermell Charlo. And imagine what that does for you going forward. But he just knows that he dropped the ball and he seemed devastated in his locker room. But it's certain instances like that against Jermell Charlo, again, getting stopped late by Willie Nelson, that just make you wonder, as good as Tony Harrison is when he's clicking on all cylinders, and just the consistency of his boxing acumen, his boxing skills. Again, he's very crafty and he's talented. And again, this is 5'8" versus 6'1". This is a 70.5-inch reach, which isn't too bad for 5'9", but 70.5-inch reach against a 76.5-inch reach. So he's got about 5 inches in height and about 6 inches in reach. So just picture the visual here of Tony Harrison, getting walked back by somebody who, you know, I don't see him as having the greatest boxing craft. Like, he doesn't have an outstanding jab, and that's one of the things that's puzzling about Tszyu. Like when you watch him against Terrell Gausha, it's not like he was using a jab to close the distance. So I'm just wondering, is his style of pressure gonna slowly erode Tony Harrison's gas tank to where Tony Harrison is that much more vulnerable in the second half of the fight? Because look, I think Tony Harrison is going to start off pretty well, unless he just gets caught early, which is a possibility. Tszyu does have knockout power, but I think that it's more likely that Tony Harrison wins majority of the early rounds. Like, I could see Tony Harrison, at least to the viewers' eyes, being up maybe 3-1 after 4, maybe even 4-1 after 5. Now, I don't know what these Australian scorecards are going to look like. That's another one of the reservations that I have in if I was going to actually bet on Tony Harrison. I'm like, wait a second. But if this looks like a competitive fight where Tony Harrison might be landing the sharper punches, but it looks like he's getting pressured by Tszyu. Say Tszyu starts off a little bit shaky, falls back a little bit, at least again to the viewers' eyes on the scorecard, but then starts walking Tony Harrison down, maybe catches him cleanly, more so in the second half of the fight. Tony Harrison has been known to tire a bit late in fights, and that's another concern here. So if this ends up being like a fight that looks like it should go 115 to 113 for Tony Harrison, I could easily see it being a close decision win for Tszyu. That's just how these kind of regional phenomenons work out. Not always the case, but I mean, we've seen it happen time and time again. So yeah, the possibility that this is a close fight that goes towards Tszyu, that's a real possibility. But I think it's also possible that Tszyu just gets outclassed by Tony Harrison. If Tony Harrison can maintain focus through 12 rounds, doesn't, get swallowed up by the spotlight, like the spotlight's not too big for him, the raucous Aussie crowd isn't too much for Tony Harrison, and that doesn't get to him, and he's able to stay composed and fight his fight, I could see him winning an 8-4 type of fight against Tszyu. I almost feel like he's gonna have to win in almost like a Devin Haney versus George Kambosos style of domination. Maybe not that dominant, but something that looks demonstrative and obvious in order for Tony Harrison to win it on the scorecards. That's just a hunch that I have. Again, I think that he's going to start off pretty fast. And I'm still this close to going Tony Harrison via decision. Like, if Tony Harrison could keep this fight in the middle of the ring and doesn't start getting backed up repeatedly against the ropes, not that Tony Harrison can't fight off the ropes. He can, but I look at Tszyu's only chance at winning this fight is if he can walk Tony Harrison down and start keeping Tony Harrison, or at least getting him over to the ropes more and more frequently to let your power punches go to where you start hard right hand to the body, and I'm naming this pattern for a reason. I've seen Tszyu do it several times. 2 right hands hard to the body, and then right hand up top. And no, that's nothing new, but if you look at how Tszyu applies it, he is throwing hard to the body to really get you to not want to get hit there again, to where you might drop your hands and compromise your head and your chin to protect your body. Tony Harrison, I think, is going to have to be in phenomenal shape to win this one, because he does have to control where this fight takes place. As Teddy Atlas says, he needs to control the real estate, and he's got to make Tszyu pay for not moving his head and for continuing to pursue. He's going to have to give Tszyu something to think about, and he's got the tools to do it. My only concern is, does he start fading late? Does whatever this style of pressure that Tszyu has been pulling off, if that starts to work against Tony Harrison, I can see a late stoppage for Tszyu. I'm actually going to go Tony Harrison pulling off at least the betting upset. This should not be considered an upset, but I'll call it an upset because it's a betting upset. I'm going to actually go with Tony Harrison to win this fight via decision. Again, he's going to have to really silence that Australian crowd in order to pull this off. And yes, Tszyu winning. Look, Tszyu could win in a number of ways. I could see him stopping Tony Harrison in the middle or late rounds. It depends on if Tony Harrison is looking as good as he did in his last fight against Sergio Garcia. But Garcia is like a 6'1" fighter who's got a great chin and who just keeps on coming forward. But Tony Harrison looked phenomenal against Sergio Garcia, and Garcia went the distance against Sebastian Fundora. So Garcia is a really tough customer, but Tony Harrison totally outclassed him, won almost all the rounds against him. But there's also a concern because Tony Harrison's, we'll call it his COVID fight in 2021 against Bryant Perella. This was Tony Harrison's return to the ring after losing that stoppage loss against Jermell Charlo. His return was against Bryant Perella, and this ended up being a split draw. So a lot of people were kind of scratching their head like, is this the last we've seen of like tip top Tony Harrison? Like, is this going to be like a descent into, you know, gatekeeper status when you're fighting a draw against Bryant Perella? But yo, Bryant Perella is at least 6 feet tall and he's a southpaw. Those are two things you don't have to worry about with Tszyu. And Tony Harrison stated that he hates fighting southpaws. It takes him a long time to start getting the read on the angles. So he doesn't like fighting southpaws. Bryant Perella, who again fought a split draw versus Harrison, southpaw. Tszyu, not a southpaw. So look, this isn't the best guy that Tony Harrison will have gone against. I mean, we'll let history tell that story. We'll let the story play out, see how good Tszyu could end up being. I mean, who knows? Maybe he is the second coming of Tszyu. We'll see. But as it stands, I don't look at this as being Tony Harrison's toughest opponent. I do look at this as being Tszyu's toughest opponent. You know, I'm going to go with Tony Harrison on this one via decision. I think it might be a split decision that looks to us like it shouldn't be a split decision. Like, I think that Tony Harrison can pull off like an 8-4 looking win. But if it looks 8-4, I think it's going to be a split decision win for Tony Harrison, where there's going to be like 115 to 113 on this side, one on this side, and it's going to come down to like that third scorecard. I could see something like that playing out, but just stylistically, I could see Tszyu just running into a lot of punches. I could see him just look very confused. I mean, we'll see if he could just walk through Tony Harrison's long punches, and Tony Harrison could fight pretty well on the inside too. Very multifaceted. Now, you don't want to keep the fight in the phone booth against Tszyu unless you've got him weakened enough to maybe finish him off if you've got him that badly hurt. But Tony Harrison, I'm thinking, will pick his spots on when to fight on the outside, when to fight on the inside, when to fight kind of backing up and moving away from Tszyu, and when to stand your ground and break Tszyu off with long combinations. I could see this looking like an obvious win for Tony Harrison, and I'm going to go with Tony Harrison to pull out the decision win. But yeah, let me know what you think about Tszyu versus Tony Harrison. I do want to say props to Tszyu for taking such a tough fight after the disappointment of your title shot falling through. Tszyu could have either picked the easy opponent, he could have just kind of sat back and waited for Jermell Charlo to heal, but you know, maybe aside from Sebastian Fundora or maybe Brian Castano, Tszyu might be fighting the toughest opponent not named Jermell Charlo, and I really respect that. And this is a huge opportunity for Tony Harrison to basically get back to title contention with this would be a huge win were he to upset Tszyu in Australia. But yeah, I'm going Harrison via decision. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.